Hari Om. Om Yang Brahma Vishnu Varunendra Rudra Maruta Stunvanti Dibbaistavayr Vedai Sangopakramopanishadair Gayanti Jang Samaga Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Jang Yoginaha Yasyantang Navidusurasuragana Devaya Tasmai Namo Namah Om. Our salutations to that Supreme Being who is one without a second, whom the sages call by various names. Our salutations to Him whose glory has been sung through the rapturous hymns of the scriptures of the world, but whose limitless and infinite glory none can comprehend. But again, whom the sages and devotees realize within their hearts in their deepest contemplation. Him we salute again and again. May He shine in our hearts, manifest there in all His glory, and dispel all darkness and ignorance. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. I'm going to speak to you on silence. There is a pen picture drawn by the great seer philosopher Shankara about a teacher and his disciples. The teacher was seated under a tree, silent, and there were disciples around him who were seated silently. The doubts and problems arising in the minds of the disciples, and they were being solved in silence. I have met such teachers who did not have to speak, but just you sit in silence in their presence and your consciousness would be lifted up. At least you could get a glimpse of what spiritual life means. You see, it is very difficult, nay, impossible, to understand what lies beneath us, what lies within each one of us. It's difficult to conceive. But in the presence of these illumined souls, at least you get a glimpse. And in order that glimpse you can have even, you have to learn to enter into silence. You see, with a noisy mind, you cannot receive anything. In this connection, I shall quote to you one of the greatest mystics of Christianity, Meister Eckhart. He writes, "There must be perfect stillness in the soul before God can whisper His word into it, before the light of God can shine in the soul and transform the soul into God. When the passions are stilled and worldly desires silenced, then the word of God can be heard in the soul." that stillness, that silence, when the passions are stilled, when all cravings have become silenced. You know why? There is God within each one of us. That perfection is there in each one of us. What does that perfection mean? Is it beneath this surface life that we know of? There is a deeper life. The life that is eternal. Behind and beneath the emotions that are arising. There is a deeper emotion which brings out the real joy, the real bliss. Then beneath this surface consciousness, there's a deeper consciousness that is omniscient. There is infinite wisdom there. In each one of us. To quote the words from the Upanishads, as one not knowing that a golden treasure lies buried beneath his feet, may walk over it again and again, yet never find it. So all beings live every moment in the city of Brahman, yet never find him because of the veil of illusion by which he is concealed. So it is not something foreign to any of us. Don't you see, we are all seeking what? Life, joy of life. We are all seeking that infinite wisdom, that abiding bliss. We are all seeking. And this search is not anything that is utopian. Actually, the fact is that that treasure is all lying within each one of us. We have to have only to reveal that, to unfold that. Heaven, perfection, that's your very nature, covered by clouds of ignorance. There is a beautiful passage in the Gita that revealed knowledge, that infinite knowledge, is only covered by ignorance, and hence man gets deluded. Why is there delusion? Why is there suffering? Why is there death? There is none there. But there is a covering of ignorance, covering of darkness. But where is this ignorance? Where is this darkness? In the mind itself. If we can silence the mind, then that what is underneath will become revealed to us. There is this aphorism by Patanjali, the great psychologist of India, or father of Indian psychology. How to achieve that union with God, or how to unfold that divinity. He simply states this: control the waves, control the thought waves of your mind. A simple statement. Control the thought waves of your mind. Silence your thoughts. Then immediately you achieve perfection. You go beyond sorrow and misery, disease and death. There is illustration given. There is a lake, and the sun is reflecting upon the lake. But the reflection is obscure because of the waves, because of the ripples and waves, and because of the dirty water of the lake. Clean up. Make those waves subside. Then there is the reflection of the sun, perfect. So it is in the mind that reflection has to come. It's already there, but mind is not reflecting. You see, the mind is reflecting that consciousness, yes, in a very small degree. Mind appears to be so lively, so conscious because of that. Consciousness percolating through the mind or senses and body. There is life in the body. Senses are active. And whose power is that? Whose consciousness is that? Divine consciousness. Percolating, reflecting through these. The moon looks bright. It's the reflection of the sun. Same way, there appears to be consciousness in the mind. And the mind is conscious because of that reflection. But it is not fully conscious. That infinite consciousness is not there. It does not reflect perfectly because of the impurities, because of distracting thoughts and waves. But if somehow those thought waves can be controlled, if there is some way, some method by which those can be controlled, immediately you attain perfection. There is another illustration given in our scriptures of a vessel filled with junk, all kinds of junk. But ether is all pervading. There is ether inside the vessel. It is filled with ether also. But that there is ether in it is not known, is not recognized because of the junk. Throw away all that junk. It's filled with ether. Same way. There is a God filling our heart, mind, soul. But there is no cognition of that. And it is because we have put junk in the mind. So much junk. Now the principle appears to be very simple. If you can control those thought waves of the mind. And you know, many teachers in the West, having studied some of this psychology, they teach people to meditate and they say, make your mind blank. See, because the thought waves are to be controlled, so do not think anything, but make your mind blank. But is it possible to make the mind blank? You see, mind cannot exist without thinking. Mind becomes apparently annihilated if there is no thought there. As for instance, when we are in deep sleep, there is no thought there, but the truth does not become revealed. So it is not that state to make the mind blank. Then furthermore, it is not merely the control of the conscious thoughts of your mind, but the subconscious and unconscious thoughts. In other words, the overhauling of the mind completely. That is what is needed, and that is what is meant. See, it is not a surface reformation, but a transformation that has to come completely, a complete renewal of the mind. That is the principle. Now, what is the method? How can we enter into that silence? The method also is given by this great psychologist as practice, and practice of one-pointedness of the mind. That is the practice. And also we must practice, but at the same time we must have discrimination and dispassion. You see, it's a very subtle thing. If you have not discrimination, and by discrimination I mean that if you have not realized or felt that God is the great treasure, He is something that is eternal. If you don't have that ideal, then it is dangerous to practice concentration. Because concentration again will bring out concentrated mind. Wherever you place your mind, it becomes intensified. And so he says, practice, but you must have dispassion, must not have cravings, desires, but create love for God more. And then with that one-pointedness of the mind, when you can raise at least at just one wave to the exclusion of all waves of thought, then the mind subsides by itself. You know, Swami Vivekananda used to give this illustration of concentration or meditation by this illustration that a carriage is drawn by 4 powerful horses down a hill. How easy it is to go. But the rider controls, holding the rein in such a way that these powerful horses are standing still in the middle of the road. That is meditation. It's not making the mind blank and empty. There you see the greatest expression of activity in that silence. You see, that is the silence that Meister Eckhart, for instance, mentioned. Passions are rampant in every one of us. But to still those passions, not allowing the mind to think of anything but of God, of Atman. You see, that is concentration. You see, again, in order that you can achieve that power, in order that you can practice, certain preparations are needed. You see, the ground has to be prepared. There is a beautiful simile given by Buddha that you can prepare the ground and you can sow seeds all in a hurry, and you can water regularly all in a hurry, but you cannot hurry the seeds to grow. They will grow in their own time. Now we have to prepare the ground, prepare the soil. We have to nurture the seeds. And then through the grace, you see, that is the thing. Through the grace of God, it will blossom. But this attempt, this struggle is most important. Now, of course, in concentration, to get that one-pointedness of the mind, there are 3 steps. And I shall come to that. But before we can practice those, there must be certain preparations in our life. What are those preparations? Of course, the main preparation again is you have to have desire for it. That is the main preparation. You have to desire for it. But again, you see, as you struggle, as you practice, as you get a glimpse of that great joy, that great desire again arises. Yearning comes. And when there is that intense yearning, intense longing for the truth of God, then immediately there comes the revelation. Now, to talk about the preparations. First, what is called certain ethical principles of life. You see, you cannot live an immoral life and find God. But again, remember that simply being good and moral is not spiritual life. Spiritual life is something more, something greater, but must be based upon ethical life. Ethical life is the basis. Now, what is meant by ethical life again? You know, if you look at the observances, you know, in every country the ideas differ. There are customs that differ in different countries. And we must not just confuse ethical life with the observances of those external customs and behaviors. But again, there are certain general universal principles. Whether you are a Christian or a Hindu or a Mohammedan or a Buddhist, these principles of life, ethical principles, apply universally. And the great psychologist, Patanjali, he sums up those principles, universal principles, that are to be applied universally by every spiritual aspirant. The first thing he says is ahimsa, which means not to hurt anybody in word, thought, or deed. You see, in Buddhism and Jainism and Christianity and Hinduism, they all have emphasized upon that ahimsa. Not to injure, not to hurt anybody by word, thought, or deed. Of course, this is understood universally. You know, in the West, I know young people, they say, well, what does it matter if the only thing is I must see that I must not hurt anybody, and then how I live my life, what matters? But that is not true. Because that is not the only principle of life. There are other principles which we must follow. Truthfulness in word, thought, and deed, but only again truth that is beneficial, and that is sweet, not harsh truth. You know, there are people who are very frank, they think they are very frank, and they speak out. And whether it hurts anybody or not, they do not care. And sometimes they love to speak out harsh truths. Now that is a bad trait of character. That must be controlled. Because be truthful, but do not hurt anybody. Then chastity. That's also very important. And then to be free from greed and envy. These are universal principles. Now again, we are nothing but slaves to our habits of life. That is all. You see, a man is a good man. He has formed certain good habits in his life. A man is a bad man because he has formed certain bad habits in his life. there is the divinity in the good man and there is the divinity in the bad man. And it is not that the good man alone will be saved and the bad man will not be saved. It is not true. That God will unfold. And bad men can become good in no time by creating another set of habits. Nothing but a bundle of habits we are. Our character is just habits. And so, this great psychologist teaches us that form certain regular habits in your life and your character will be transformed. Now, what are those habits? First is cleanliness. Physical and mental. It's regular habit. Of course, physical cleanliness, we all know that unless we keep clean, and which is very easy with soap and water, it gets dirty. So, regular cleaning is needed of the body. Same way, regular cleaning of the mind is important. Now, how do we practice cleanliness of the mind? That's a very beautiful truth taught. Feel the presence of God and bathe yourself in that presence, in that light of God. And think you are also the spirit, the same substance that God is made of. You see, what you think you become. And if you think you are impure, you are unclean, or you are a worm, you become so. You know, it's a bad psychology that this Christian theology teaches. It's a bad psychology. In the name of humility and humbleness, they consider themselves worms, sinners. But you see, if you call yourself a sinner, you become a sinner. If you think you are a sinner, you become a sinner. That is the law. That is the psychological law. And just think that you are pure and convince yourself you are pure, not with any sense of egotism or vanity, but because you are bathed in the light of God, because you are a child of God, and have that faith in God. And to have that faith in God, you have to have that faith in your purity, in your cleanliness. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, you must have this faith that I've chanted the name of God and that has made me pure. That has that power. And Swami Vivekananda used to say that you cannot have faith in God unless you have faith in yourself. You see, how can you go and pray if you are so different from God? How can you have your mind united with Him if you are so unclean, such a sinner? And so you have to feel that you are pure, you are clean, because you have thought of God, you chanted His name, you are in His presence. And this is a regular habit we have to form. Then study. The study, of such scriptures that would give you the urge to practice the disciplines of life. Not merely to have intellectual satisfaction, which is important in the beginning. But read only such books which contain the teachings of illumined souls. Because otherwise books are opinions. And that doesn't help you. But those who have the direct knowledge of God, and you don't have to seek very far to find such books written by or recorded in the books, the teachings of the great illumined seers, a Christ, a Buddha, a Krishna, a Ramakrishna, and read only such books. Of course, you can just read just to know the opinions of people, but do not subscribe to the opinions of people unless you have discriminated, you have thought out. The other day, a young man came to me and he said he has read such and such a book and he's following the teachings of that book and accordingly he's meditating. And then I inquired what he does. And then I said, young man, if you follow these, you will be in danger and difficulty. And then as I talked to him, I could see he was all confused. And he was reading the opinion of an individual. I said, go and read Sermon on the Mount, teachings of Buddha, Bhagavad Gita, teachings of Krishna, teachings of Ramakrishna. Direct truth you get. And they are simple. And then also study means what we call japam, a regular habit of chanting the name of God. And through that practice, there comes devotion and purity of heart. And so it's a very important practice. Then surrendering every day, regularly, surrendering the fruits of your action to God. It's a wonderful habit to form. Whenever you go to begin a work, think of God. When you have finished your work, think of God. Surrender the fruits of your action to God. See, of course, the ideal thing is to keep your mind, there is a current running through your mind in whatever you do, in every way, to keep that current of the thought of God going. But in order that you can come to that stage, at least try this. Whenever you undertake anything, think of God. As you have finished, think of God. When you go out of your house, think of God. When you enter your house, think of God. You see, God is not only existing in the temple or in the church, but God is also in your room, in your house, welcoming you at the gate, at the door. Feel that presence. And as you practice these regularly, then is it that you are ready for the higher practices of concentration and meditation. What is known as pratyahara, which means to gather the forces of your mind, outgoing forces of your mind, gathering the senses and draw them inward and concentrate upon your chosen deity or God. You see, it's a power that comes to you. The mind, wherever you want to place it, it stays there. No more distractions. For instance, you have been busy. Then you go to pray. As soon as you sit to pray, you close the doors of your senses, as it were, and you have entered into the chamber of your heart, and there you are in the presence of God. Now again, in order that power can come to you, you have to follow certain practices. Because you cannot just order your mind. That's the difficulty. You have to come to a stage when you can order your mind. But in the beginning, it is not possible. So as you sit, distractions come. Now try try to see the presence of God in the distractions also. There is a practice, there is a truth given that when the food is purified, the senses become, and the mind becomes purified. When you only accept pure food, then your mind becomes pure. Now, what is the food? Not only what we eat, but we are gathering food through the doors of our senses. And what we gather, that food that we gather through the doors of our senses, must be pure food. There's a beautiful prayer in the Upanishads. With our eyes may we hear with our ears may we hear what is good, with our eyes may we behold thy righteousness. Tranquil in body may we who worship thee find rest. There's a deep meaning to this. With our ears may we hear what is good. Now you go to a party, and when they get together, sometimes they begin to talk about somebody else who is not present there and not pleasant. They talk about that person. So you are hearing what is not good. And then behold his righteousness everywhere. But what is the tendency of the mind? Criticizing, judging, gossiping. You see, that's the tendency of the mind. Forget all that. See the righteousness. There is good and bad in every one of us. And, there is a saying that a great soul, if he sees just a speck of goodness in somebody, he sees it as an ocean of goodness. But an evil-minded person, if there's a speck of evil, he sees an ocean of evil there. And of course, such persons cannot meditate, cannot pray. And so you have to control your mind. With our ears may we hear what is good, with our eyes may we behold thy righteousness. Tranquil in body, you see, tranquility will come. Conflicting emotions will be controlled. And then is it that you can worship God and find rest in him. Now again, you see, this is the first step, pratyahara, concentrated mind. You have gathered the forces of the mind, gathered the outgoing senses and indrawn, made them indrawn. Then, as you can hold that mind for a length of time, it is concentration. And that comes to you through practice. Then it becomes meditation when it continues a longer time. While you are concentrating, you are in that stage, still the flow, the current is not continuous. Your mind is concentrated for a second, then it becomes restless. Then again concentrated, then becomes restless. Like the flickering light, electric light. So it is not yet meditative. And meditation will be when there is a flow of thought without any gap, without any flickering. See, as the light of a lamp protected from the wind is steady. Or the illustration is given. Oil poured from one vessel into another, and there is no break, but a continuous flow. So similarly, when the mind is running continuously towards God, that would be meditation. That is a state to arrive. And when you reach that state, then as you continue that another length of time, there is illumined knowledge of God, Samadhi. You see, then again, where to concentrate? We have to concentrate or think of the presence of God within this body. It is all right also to concentrate and meditate upon God outside of yourself and pray to Him as outside for a beginner. But real prayer and real meditation when you learn to go within yourself. Because God within yourself is attainable easily. God is also everywhere. But nearmost God is within you. Who is within you? That is why Sri Ramakrishna used to say, those who say, "Oh God, come down to me," has not yet begun to pray. One time I heard a minister explaining how God in His high heaven can listen to our prayers. He says, look at the radio and television today. And so there is connection in heaven. You see, and what did Christ, why did He teach all the time, kingdom of God is heaven, is within? And yet they would not take that. And you have to meditate within yourself. Now again, according to the yogis and the mystics and those who have attained to that spiritual height, they point out that there are centers of spiritual consciousness within this body. And when the mind or consciousness is in the lower centers, then we are worldly. You see, let me point out to make it clearer. There are 6 centers and the 7th. The 7th one we do not call exactly center. That's the final, 7th, the 7th. Now at the base of the spine, that is one center of consciousness. The genital organs is 2nd center of consciousness. Navel is the 3rd center of consciousness. Heart is the 4th center of consciousness. Throat is the 5th center of consciousness. Eyebrows, between the eyebrows, is the 6th center of consciousness. And the 7th is located in the center of the brain. Now, everybody's mind is in one or the other of these centers of consciousness. Each one's mind. Generally, people's mind hover around the lower 3 centers of consciousness. And you see, for instance, lust, pleasures of the senses. The pleasure is not in the object itself. But because your mind is concentrated in a particular center of consciousness, there comes the pleasure. You see, as long as the mind and consciousness hovering within the first 3 centers of consciousness, there is the expression of worldliness, lust, greed, desire for power, for name and fame. Then, when the consciousness rises to the center in the heart, there is love. Now, almost everyone's consciousness arises to this center. And this love between man and woman, for instance, when one first has that, he thinks this is divine. And it is divine. Because the center, the consciousness has arisen to the center in the heart. But it does not remain, it becomes degenerated when again the consciousness runs into the lower center. So it doesn't last. And then only when we direct our love towards God who is residing within the heart, then is it that love remains pure and finds fulfillment. Then again, You see, through prayer and meditation, the consciousness rises into the center of the heart. And there is vision and ecstasy. When the mind is concentrated there, it's not outside. You see, as your mind is concentrated there into that center of spiritual consciousness, the whole consciousness of God becomes open to you. Then again, when the mind rises, consciousness rises into the center, in the throat, there is realized that current of joy. That ecstasy becomes, in a sense, permanent, abiding. And then, of course, he cannot bear worldly talks or worldly thoughts. His mind is all the time pitched high, as it were. Then when the consciousness rises to the center between the eyebrows, there is what we call Samadhi Elimination. But in this illumined knowledge of God, there is still some duality left. Sri Ramakrishna used to describe this as, you see the light, but there is a thin glass covering that light. And you want to break through that. And then comes the highest samadhi, when the mind consciousness rises to the center in the brain, and there is a full illumined knowledge of God. Om Hari Om. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Abir Maidhi Rudrajatte Dakshinang Mukhang Te Namang Pahi Nityam. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from death to immortality. Lead us from darkness to light. Light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace.